I'm Martin Foster, Principal Consultant at Team Forum.
I'm Maria Muir. I lead Sooner Saver Happier here in Asia Pacific.
Here to talk about the business agility report that was published last month.
The third challenge we're going to talk about is all about governance. Governance rage is a real thing. So let's understand what does it mean, and how might we resolve it?
Now, this is an area where most organizations say they don't do well with. All sorts of different root causes to that sort of on the slide right now. But there's a few things we learned from respondents to the business agility report that the organizations that thought they did well, they had a sort of a known delegation framework. You knew like what your decision rights were at each level. And that helped do the second part, which is push decisions down, right? If you've got a value stream or you've got teams, like people have to understand what decisions they can make. And that will require being quite clear and straightforward about it, and commensurate updates to operating models, operating policies, so that you can still know what decisions you can make, but you're also like being conscientious of balancing governance and risk. And last but not least, what people did that did this well was make these decisions transparent. So if you're going to make a significant direct decision, like the quarterly and annual planning cycles really feel like one of this, but anything else that happens during the year, where do people go to see the decision that was made, the context behind it, both potentially physically or virtually? Governance is a really big part of the Sooner Safer Happier world. So how does that click in with you, Maria?
Well, I think if we were to unpack governance, it probably touches on a couple of different aspects. And so the governance rage is a real thing. And it's something that, in talking to teams, in talking to leaders, it's about how do we remove some of that rage. And I think the rage is caused by a couple of things. And you touched on a few of them. But if I look at then the decision rights and the accountability, that kind of goes to me hand in hand with how we then start to talk about teams and what is their scope of accountability and what is their ownership. So we then, think about a value stream and thinking about end to end. Being clear on that, I think, is then helpful. So that's kind of a piece that you can tackle as part of that. I think one of the other elements of governance is then thinking about how do we then be clear on actually what are we going after. And so often a lot of governance rage is then set up in the context of having to put together these very lengthy and often not looked at again business cases. So what does that then mean if we were to make that lean, what would that be instead? So something that we've introduced into organizations, whether that be a bank or a telco or an insurance company, is the concept of a living memo. So how do we take some of the cumbersome policy and procedures around the creation of a business case and actually make that a little bit more lean, and think about, well, what information do I actually need to have upfront and how am I then executing on that? So a living memo construct is not a set and forget kind of document. It's very then clear around the outcomes that you're going after. So it comes back to the strategy definition piece. And then it then articulates, well, what are the OKRs that I'm going to then deliver on a 3-year, 1-year, quarterly basis, so I can then be held to account that way. Because often governance rage is created because leaders or execs think that they don't have the right controls. But here we're being visible, and the more transparency we have, the more accountability we can have, then less rage we can remove some of that rage. So a living memo is a concept that we've used to help with that. And then probably the next thing then is how do we then start to think about embedding some of those controls into the actual work? So rather than it being a stage gate, which means that we have to stop everything and go to that architectural approval board to then be able to progress to the next step, or go to stop everything and go to cab because I can't release anything and make the next step. But how do we then introduce the concept of risk or the concept of guardrails in the flow of work with teams at the beginning, so that they can be thinking about that as part of the work? So governance is everyone's responsibility. Risk management is everyone's responsibility. It's just not those that have those titles. And so the more that we can then embed that into the flow of the work, the less rage, again, that we have for everybody. And that then helps, unlock that the ability to deliver in a sooner, safer, happier way.
That's fantastic. I remember earlier in my career having to write a 300-page product requirement document that was never looked at ever again. And similarly, queuing months to meet up with architectural review boards. That really just slowed down delivery, though they were trying to achieve something that's useful. So I really like the concept of the memo, particularly like with it's applied. I believe, at the sort of value stream level, that's kind of like the place to go. But then if you're in a value stream, like how do you find where the memo is, other related corporate policies that might flow down from that? Like we still want to like front and center the core part. And that's where I think, like, again, tools like Teamform can connect the value stream, through to those other internal documents and artifacts. And then as we start to think of the guardrails, like, I think one of the challenges with these is like, who do I go for like technology security policy? Who do I go to as a value stream for like the legal assistance? Who do I go to when I'm considering go-to-market style changes? Really having that encoded inside a set of business principles or guardrails to know that in this value stream there is a person that has the core first responsibility for it, your point of contact. So as we're all as you said, individually responsible to like keep this in consideration, we know who the local person within 100 people group, 150 people group to consult with whenever we need further assistance with it.
Absolutely. That's what we call safety teams. So how do we have not just a cross-functional team delivering on the product or enhancing the customer experience, but how do we have a cross-functional team that's then responsible for actually keeping the safety of that delivery, whether that be, line one risk, which is often in the case in financial services, or it's architecture, or it's cybersecurity, and that's definitely important for everyone at the moment. So how do we then have a cross-functional team that's then allocated and aligned with those teams to then help make sure that we do know who to go to. They have some context, they're aware of the outcome that everyone is trying to get to, and they can provide the right support that is fit for purpose based on the outcomes that the team needs to go after. But again, empowering the team as much as possible just to get on with it because we want them to be thinking about that as work itself.
Yeah, and I like that lead and guardrail control of like how do we show leaders at those different levels that hey, actually there is no like software security person assigned to this value stream. Like that makes it quite actionable. It also means that there's less like thick process going on to find the right people inside the workforce that help implement these higher level objectives.
Yeah,
That's
sounds good.
what I've got for like governance.
Sounds good. So maybe on this one, the to-dos are be clear on what are the controls you have in place. And so often I've seen in organizations like 200 plus, we've gotten them down to 4 to 6.
Yep.
So how might you then lean some of those out and be quite deliberate about that? Yeah, so maybe that's the next step for everybody.
Yeah, and once you've got that, you can codify it inside that lightweight memo.